Hello, I'm Garry Kasparov. I'm happy to address the Convention on Founding Principles. The principles we are discussing here are dear to my Soviet-born heart, precisely because they represent exactly what we did not have in the Soviet Union and do not have in Russia today. Inalienable rights, the rule of law, free speech, and leaders who represent the interests of the people, not themselves. These things are what the citizens of dictatorships dream of, but these principles have powerful enemies, even in America, the nation that is supposed to embody them and uphold them. When we talk about the collapse of democracy, it evokes dramatic images. A military coup with tanks rolling through the streets, or assassinations, foreign invasions, or something else out of Hollywood. Their reality is usually much less exciting. A slow decay. It begins when the core principles of democracy are undermined from within and are not adequately defended by those who are sworn to do so. One of the threats, and one that is often underestimated, is corruption. It is underestimated for several reasons. The word is overused and so broad as to mean just about anything. I will settle for the dictionary definition here: dishonest or fraudulent conduct by those in power. Note that it does not necessarily have to be criminal to be corrupt. Corruption is usually well hidden, taking place behind closed doors, in private calls, meetings, and bank transfers. And it's so banal. Many find it hard to believe that such powerful people are motivated by money, not party or ideology. But time and again, from lowly functionaries to the head of state, the answer is that famous phrase, follow the money. The danger of corruption is also underestimated. But when state power is used for private gain, democracy can go off the rails very quickly. People lose faith in their government. That cynicism turns to apathy, a symptom that is often fatal. When people are disgusted by their representatives and tune out, the forces of corruption gain even more power, a vicious cycle. The crooks also realize that the institutions of democracy are a threat to their profiteering. To be safe, they must blind the watchers, remove the guardrails, fire the inspectors general, and refuse to allow access to any information that might expose them. Even the most perfectly designed checks and balances don't work if enough politicians put party and power over their oaths of office. Sound familiar? In the free world, it is still more common for rich people to get into politics than for people to get into politics to get rich. But as most of them would say, you can never be too rich. Individual wealth is no antidote to corruption. In nearly every autocratic state, politics are a means of acquiring personal power and money. State power is used to enrich them, their families, and their cronies. There is no ideological preference in authoritarian corruption. Socialist dictators fill their offshore bank accounts with looted billions as eagerly as the neo-fascists. Their only motto is, let's steal together. I know, politicians in democracies aren't exactly famous for being squeaky clean. There have always been the backroom deals, favors for friends and donors, and a whole infrastructure of lobbying and rent-seeking. Along with those mostly legal means, there are outright crimes, like bribery. The difference between corruption in a democracy and in authoritarian regimes is that in democracy, those lawbreakers can go to jail, and often do. But we are seeing in America today transition from one type of corruption to another, from the favors and lobbying we are used to at a certain level to the outright exploitation of public power for personal gain. Family members are appointed in positions of great power. in control of billions of dollars with little oversight by elected officials. The president himself maintains sprawling business interests around the world, opening the door both to potential outside pressure and using his vast power for personal gain. There is a huge danger here, one the founding fathers warned us about very clearly. They wrote frequently about the threat of conflicts of interest. One reason, by the way, that they insisted on paying the president a salary so he wouldn't be tempted to use his power for profit. The founders had just broken away from hereditary rule, the era of kings and queens, so they were dead set against any appearance of nepotism. Even John Adams, who was more sympathetic to the aristocracy than most of the founders, wrote in a letter to Thomas Jefferson in 1813 about how much he detested hereditary honors. George Washington, who had no children of his own, also worried about corruption replacing merit in power, warning in a letter about partiality for friends or relations. His lesson has largely stuck. While there have been a few minor political dynasties in America, it is remarkable that in the 244 years since the birth of the United States, only 2 parent-child combinations have ever become president. And both sons, John Quincy Adams and George W. Bush, were duly elected, not appointed, although both were elected in a very controversial fashion, by the way. Contrast that to the current moment, when President Trump's daughter and son-in-law wield power both officially and unofficially. Story after story has come out about Jared Kushner being in charge of everything from the US-Mexico border wall to the American coronavirus response. And you can see how well both of those things have gone. Corruption isn't just petty thievery. It has real consequences. Its effects are long-term and general, but also immediate and specific in our daily lives and death. The founders had an answer for corrupt presidents who might abuse their power to enrich themselves or to get themselves re-elected. They called it impeachment. Unfortunately, impeachment requires both parts of another branch of government, Congress, to do its job. And when a Senate majority decides to put the interest of party over country, it is very difficult to rein in corruption. There are also effects beyond American borders. As dictators around the world celebrate having someone who speaks their language in the Oval Office, instead of standing up for the values of free trade, of the rule of law, of human rights, or principles of any kind, the Trump administration is only looking for a quid pro quo. And as we learned during Trump's impeachment trial, this means something in Trump's interest, not America's. This isn't only bad for American global leadership, but it's also bad for American business and prosperity. When corruption takes hold, everything is about who you know, not what you know or how well you can do it. This is why planned economies and corrupt dictatorships inevitably fall into economic ruin, even if they have oil and other resources. The money only goes up to the top, not to the people, not to services. America isn't there, not yet. The November 3rd election is hugely important, but it won't be the end of this fight. It must be just the beginning. As I've said, since his campaign started in 2015, Trump is a symptom of a sick system, not the disease itself. To stop him and to avoid more like him, the system must be repaired and strengthened. Transparency, disclosure, divestment, all the things the founders saw as necessary to avoid dangerous conflicts of interest. We need new laws and leaders who will apply them, because the old honor system does not work when our officials have no honor. Corruption is rising and spreading across the world, a world that is waiting for America to come to its senses and again lead the way. But America must lead by example and cannot lead without getting its own house in order first. That means cleaning up its act and cleaning house, beginning with the big one at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Thank you, and thank you for fighting for founding principles.